All right, let us turn again to Exodus chapter 7. Exodus chapter 7. So we have introduced the subject of Levi, the Levites, the priesthood, Aaron, the first high priest. We talked about him and his background a little bit. Talked about his type. Aaron is a type of Christ. And last week looked at the roles of a priest. And what we'd like to start next is to go back, and we're going to begin with Exodus chapter 7. We covered the introduction a few weeks ago, but we'll start here. And what we'd like to do is look at the significant events that Aaron is tied to. Of course, a word of warning would go that if you were to just punch his name into a concordance, you're going to find a whole lot more. He's just mentioned verse after verse after verse. So we're not going to do that. We're not going to go through every single time that he's mentioned every single thing that he does. But I've tried to divide this into just some significant chunks. And what we'd like to cover today, and this can actually be our title, we'll call it From Spokesman to Sinai. Okay, from Spokesman to Sinai, and try to cover the significant events from Exodus chapter 7 all the way up to Exodus chapter 24, and hitting the highlights. Let's take it into two separate points, and within those points we'll get 5 different chunks. The first thought would be to talk about Aaron in Egypt. Okay, Aaron in Egypt. We're in Exodus chapter 7. If we remember from the introduction, chapter 6 had kind of laid the foundation for who he is and where he had come from. We know that Aaron is of the tribe of Levi. We know that he's brother to Moses. He's 3 years older than his brother Moses. So when the Exodus begins, he's about 83 years old. It gives his genealogy and tells us that Aaron is the 4th generation from Levi. That's significant because we remember the promise God gave to Abraham in the book of Genesis was that your children will go into a land that is not theirs. They'll serve a people there. And in the 4th generation, God would bring them out with a mighty hand. That sets the timetable when Levi comes into Egypt. 4 generations from him would be the generation that would leave. So you can certainly think that among the spiritual that might be in Israel, among those that are familiar with the promises God made to Abraham, there might be an expectation there. There was probably likely a great excitement amongst many when Moses returned, as short-lived as that may have been. We remember from chapters 4, 5, and 6 that Aaron was to be Moses' spokesman. Moses has complained about his speech and whether it is that he stuttered or had some kind of impairment or was just exaggerating in that. Aaron is given to him as a gift. Aaron is given to Moses as a spokesman. Exodus chapter 7, verse number 1, it says, "And the Lord said unto Moses, See, I have made thee a god to Pharaoh, and Aaron thy brother shall be thy prophet. Thou shalt speak all that I command thee, and Aaron thy brother shall speak unto Pharaoh, that he send the children of Israel out of his land. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. But Pharaoh shall not hearken unto you, that I may lay my hand upon Egypt, and bring forth mine armies and my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great judgments. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I stretch forth mine hand upon Egypt, and bring out the children of Israel from among them. And Moses and Aaron did as the Lord commanded them, so did they. Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron 83 years old, when they spake unto Pharaoh." The first chunk here that we would look at while Aaron is in Egypt is the commission to Moses and Aaron. Here we have the renewed commission that they are to go speak to Pharaoh, that they are to tell Pharaoh and his company, God says to let these people go. Now they know early on, God has not hid the plan from them. God has been very forthcoming. God has given them all of the details. Pharaoh's not going to listen. Pharaoh is not going to willingly, of his own goodness of heart, of his own kind nature, let the children of Israel go. God reveals to them, he lets them know here in this passage that it's God's plan to lead them out by power. When this is over, the children of Israel and the children of Egypt will know that God has delivered them by his hand, not by Pharaoh's. Israel's exodus from Egypt is not going to be the result of goodwill. It's not going to be the result of rationale. It's not going to be the result of the wisdom of Pharaoh. It's going to be because Pharaoh has enough. Because God, in episode after episode, plague after plague, judgment after judgment, makes his all-powerful hand known. And God says there in verse number 4 that I'll lead them out of the land of Egypt by great judgments. So they will leave by God's hand, not by Pharaoh's. So Aaron comes on the scene to us, commissioned to go with Moses, to speak to Pharaoh, to be Moses' spokesperson, and to command Pharaoh, let these people go. And yet, in God's wisdom, he reveals to Moses and to Aaron, lest they be discouraged. You know, you go into God said, let us go. And Pharaoh's initial response being, no. Moses and Aaron won't be taken back by that. They won't be shocked at that reference. God's plan is that he say no, and that God begin to reveal his hand and his power. When this is over, God gets the glory. Not Moses, not Aaron, and not Pharaoh. Now, beginning from verse number 8, and then through chapter number 11, we see the second significant chunk, and that is the contest with Pharaoh. Okay, so we've got number 1, the Aaron in Egypt. We're talking about his commission and now his contest with Pharaoh. I'll just read a couple of chunks here of verses so that we get the main idea. We won't read everything for these 4 chapters. But chapter 7, verse number 8 says, And the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, When Pharaoh shall speak unto you, saying, Show a miracle for you, then thou shalt say unto Aaron, Take thy rod and cast it before Pharaoh, and it shall become a serpent. And Moses and Aaron went in unto Pharaoh, and they did so as the Lord had commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent. Then Pharaoh also called the wise men and the sorcerers. Now the magicians of Egypt, they also did in like manner with their enchantments. For they cast down every man his rod, and they became serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods. And he hardened Pharaoh's heart, and that he hearkened not unto them, as the Lord had said. So this passage begins the contest with Pharaoh. We remember from the previous chapters when Moses had gone to Pharaoh and said, Let my people go, and the Lord hath said, Let my people go, that they may worship him in the wilderness. Pharaoh said, Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice? When Moses and Aaron return after this renewed commission, and they say here in this passage, or verse number 10, they do as the Lord commands, what does Pharaoh say? Pharaoh says in verse number 9, show a miracle. Okay, if you are who you say you are, if you are representatives of this God that you speak of, then let's see it. Let's see a miracle. Show me who you are. Show me that you are who you say you are. And of course, in this passage, we have Aaron tossing down his rod, and it becomes a serpent. Now, this was not a new miracle for Moses and Aaron. This is something they had already seen. You remember, this is one of the miracles that God gave to Moses to prove to Israel that he was who he said he was. And when Moses meets up with Aaron and they go to the people, he shows all those signs and wonders. This is not the first time Moses and Aaron have seen this, but it is the first time that Moses and Aaron get to see what happened, the rest of this passage. Now, Pharaoh's magicians here in this passage, it says that they do in like manner with their enchantments. So they throw their rods down, and their rods become serpents. Now, they hadn't been privy to this knowledge yet. God hadn't told them specifically that this was going to happen. Now, you could see that would give reason. Does it give reason for hesitation? Do you stutter a bit? Do you stall a little bit? Well, you'll notice what God allows to work immediately when Pharaoh's magicians do this. Aaron's rod swallows up their rods. God showed himself. God showed before any plagues, right? This is not the first plague. This is before any plagues, any judgments fall on Israel or fall on Egypt. God gives both Pharaoh and Moses and Aaron a display of his power and how he is in control in all of these situations. What Pharaoh's magicians may be able to do at times is mimic. Satan is a good imitator. Satan on his own is not honestly very original. He has the same bag of tricks that work all the time, and he's an imitator. But God is in control in this, and he allows Aaron's rod to swallow up their rods. This would have been a great help to Moses and Aaron. Now, ironically, the thing that would be a help to Moses and Aaron, in contrast, hardens Pharaoh. You see, Moses and Aaron can look at this and see, yep, our God is all-powerful. Our God is in control. Any imitation, any mimicking that Pharaoh and his magicians would do, they are severely outmatched. Our God is still all-powerful, great in power and wisdom. Pharaoh, on the other hand, sees this and he's hardened. Because Pharaoh could now look at this and see, well, that's not that big a deal. Aaron's rod swallowed theirs up. In real time, my magicians were able to do the same thing that Aaron and Moses were able to do. And it's weird, right? You see this in life sometimes. It's just not just this episode. You can kind of see it across the board in life. That why is it that certain people can see the exact same thing or go through the exact same circumstances, the exact same, things of life. And some people, it softens them. Some people, it becomes a great source of help. Some people, it becomes a great spurring to faith. And yet other people, it hardens them. It embitters them. It makes them crusty. People that struggle or people that are not willing to look at things through spiritual eyes and through the help of the Lord often have a different outcome in how they look at things. And this same event that can be used as a help to the faith of Moses and Aaron is actually used to harden someone like Pharaoh. Now, Paul recalls these events later. We're not going to turn there, but in 2 Timothy chapter 3, he actually names these guys. He names the magicians from Egypt when he discusses the last days. And Paul says that in the last days, 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 8, it's going to be one of the symptoms of those days is that people were going to resist or withstand the truth. And the analogy that he gives is Moses and Aaron when they come and they stand before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's magicians withstand Moses. In Exodus chapter 7, though, if you continue on in verse number 14, you actually begin to see the plagues as they begin. And Aaron is very instrumental in the working of these plagues. In Exodus chapter 7, verse 14, the Bible says, "And the Lord said unto Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He refuseth to let the people go. Get thee unto Pharaoh in the morning. Lo, he goeth out unto the water. Thou shalt stand by the river's brink against he come, and the rod which was turned to a serpent shalt thou take in thine hand. Thou shalt say unto him, The Lord God of the Hebrews has sent me unto thee, saying, Let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. And behold, hitherto thou wouldest not hear. Thus saith the Lord, In this thou shalt know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will smite with the rod that is in my hand upon the waters which are in the river, and they shall be turned to blood. And the fish that is in the river shall die, and the river shall stink, and the Egyptians shall loathe to drink of the water of the river. And the Lord spake unto Moses, Say unto Aaron, Take thy rod, and stretch out thy hand upon the waters of Egypt, and upon their streams, upon their rivers, upon their ponds, and upon all their pools of water, that they may become blood, and that there may be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. And Moses and Aaron did so. And you are going to see in similar kind Aaron's involvement in using his rod in calling these plagues down. He talks here about the Nile being turned to blood in chapter 8, verse 6. The plague of frogs in Exodus chapter 8, verse 16 and 17. We're not going to read all of these, the plague of lice. But so begins the series of judgments that fall upon Egypt. Let's hit the summary verse at the end, Exodus chapter 11. Exodus chapter 11 and verse 10. It says, "And Moses and Aaron did all these wonders before Pharaoh. And the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart so that he would not let the children of Israel go out of his land." Aaron got to see close up the power of God. And as this story develops from chapter 7 through chapter 11, more and more is seen. Not just God's power in calling down the judgments or in sending these plagues, but God's ultimate power in, the circumstances. Think about this. God had control over when the frogs could be turned off, right? Moses said, "Okay, Pharaoh, when do you want them gone?" And because Pharaoh was allowed to appoint the exact time, that was evidence of who was in control of those frogs. When the magicians, after the plague of lice hits, and they are no longer able to duplicate, there comes a time when Pharaoh's magicians are no longer able to imitate these plagues. This is not just something that's being conjured on and off by Moses and Aaron. This is a display of God's power. You think about the plague where the fire and hail were mixed together. And Moses and Aaron, they stand before Pharaoh, and Moses basically is able to challenge him and say, here's a display of God's power. I'm going to walk out of here through that fire of hail, through the fire and hail. He says, when I get outside of the city, it's going to stop. And that's exactly what happened. Moses walks through the fire and hail. He walks outside the city limits, and then it stops. These guys have been able to see time and time again, not just in the judgments, but in the circumstances and in the control of those, a display of God's power. And this is going to be very important. Aaron is going to become the one that stands between God and men. As high priest, as the mediator, as the intercessor, he'll be the one that stands between God and man. It becomes very important for him to be familiar with God and know who he is. To know that the one he stands before, to know the one he intercedes to, is all powerful. He is all wise. He is in all control. He's completely and totally sovereign. And Aaron gets to see that on display here in these plagues. So that's Aaron in Egypt. Now the second point would be Aaron and the Exodus. And that begins in chapters 12. Well, chapter 12 begins the subject of the Passover, and then by the end of chapter 12, they are leaving Egypt. Now, I want to look at three significant things. And I start by saying the complaint of Israel. God made his presence known to the entire people. Okay? Exodus chapter 13, verse 21 says this. Exodus 13:21. "And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them in the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light to go by day and night. He took not away the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people." God made his presence known to the children of Israel. Obviously through the plagues, he did. Obviously in his mighty hand with which he has delivered them from Egypt, he did. But even physically, even in this pillar of cloud and in this pillar of fire, they had a visible representation there of his presence. He was able to make his presence known before the people. And this cloud and this fire led them. Now, we know that this did not stop them from complaining. from chapter 14 through chapter 17. You have 4 chapters, right? 14, 15, 16, and 17. And you have no less than 4 times the children of Israel complain. They complain when they get to the Red Sea because they're afraid of Pharaoh. They complain when they get to Marah because the waters were bitter. They complain when they get into the wilderness of Sin because they were hungry and didn't have any food. They complain when they get to Rephidim because they don't have any water. Now, the complaint of Israel often finds itself directed against Moses and Aaron, right? In chapter 5, in Exodus chapter 5, when Moses and Aaron go before Pharaoh, Exodus chapter 5, the first meeting doesn't turn out very well. And when they tell Pharaoh to let my people go that they may worship in the wilderness, Pharaoh basically says, no, you guys are just a bunch of lazy, you're idle, you don't want to work, you're just trying to get out. So here's what we'll do. In response to what I see as your laziness, Pharaoh ups the ante and he challenges them even more that they are to continue making bricks, only Pharaoh's going to cut off the supply of straw, right? We remember that. Exodus chapter 5, verse 18. Exodus 5:18 says, "Go therefore now and work, for there shall no straw be given you, yet you shall deliver the tale," or for our terms in 2023, we would say tally of bricks. "And the officers of the children of Israel did see that they were in an evil case, after it was said, you shall not diminish aught from your bricks of your daily task. And they met Moses and Aaron, who stood in the way as they came forth from Pharaoh, and they looked unto them. The Lord look upon you and judge, because ye have made our Savior to be abhorred in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of his servants, to put a sword in their hand to slay us." That's one. In Exodus chapter 16, verse number 2. In Exodus chapter 16, verse 2, it says that the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said to them, "Would to God we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, when we did eat bread to the full. For ye have brought us forth into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Now, I don't have to have you turn there, but let me read quickly one more. In Numbers chapter 16 and verse 3, it says, "They gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron, and said to them, Ye take too much upon you." The people in their complaint often express it against Moses and Aaron. Now, this is a good lesson for Aaron, right? He just learned the power of God. He just learned that through visible displays, God's sovereignty, God's control, God's overwhelming power in every scenario and circumstance. On the flip side, he also immediately learns people are weak. People are pitiful. And people complain and they murmur. Just as Aaron had learned that, as he stands between God and men, he's able to see the power of God. He's able to see the weakness of men. And he has to stand between these. He has to stand between God and men. And now he knows who God is, and he knows who these people are. And they're weak, and they're pitiful, and they'll complain, and they'll turn. Often our murmurings are directed at men. That's where we find our comfort, right? We're not new, just as our parents did in the garden, and just as the children of Israel did in the Exodus, and just like we do today. When something goes wrong, it's always best to have somebody to blame. If you can have somebody to point the finger at, it's almost like that gives us an edge of relief. Or maybe it feels like maybe it helps us with the guilt that we feel, if we could just point the finger at somebody. And yet, we learn in the Scripture that often, though our murmurings are directed at people, the murmurings are usually against the Lord. In this same chapter, if you're there, Exodus 16, verse 7, Exodus chapter 16, verse 7, it says, In the morning, then ye shall see the glory of the Lord, for that he heareth your murmurings against the Lord. And what are we that ye murmur against us? They were able to tell them, I know you're complaining against us and you are mad at us. These murmurings are against the Lord, right? The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of cloud by night is not being taken from them. It's leading them in each step of the journey, in each step of this path. Their complaint is delivered against Moses and against Aaron, and yet it's obvious underneath the dissatisfaction is with the Lord. Just as Aaron had gotten a glimpse of the good, he's now gotten a glimpse of the bad. We got to be careful about that, right? We need to be careful about the criticism that we put against people when really our dissatisfaction is with the circumstances, and hence usually our dissatisfaction, our unhappiness is with the Lord and our lot in life right now. On the flip side of that, hopefully it helps us learn to brush off some criticism, right? Oftentimes people are critical. I think about Samuel, 1 Kings chapter number 8, when Samuel was discouraged, right, as priest, and the people have demanded a king. And, man, what am I not doing good? Am I not doing a good job? What in the world? And the Lord comes to Samuel and comforts him and says, they haven't rejected you. They've rejected me. This is the way that I had set this up. Their anger is at me. And it's the same thing here with Aaron and Moses in Exodus chapter 16. Their anger may express itself against Moses and against Aaron, but they're following the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. So be careful. Be careful against who your anger is directed and your criticism is directed. And then also keep an eye when criticism does come your way. Oftentimes it's veiled at who it's really intended for. The complaint of Israel. Exodus chapter 17, the next significant chunk is the conflict with Amalek. This is a fun story. We like this story. We learn here in Exodus chapter 17, beginning in verse 8, it says, Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said unto Joshua, Choose us out men, and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him, and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. It came to pass, when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed. When he let his hand down, or let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat thereon. And Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, the one on the one side, the other on the other side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. This is their first real battle, right? After the children of Israel have left the land of Egypt, this is the first real conflict with people, with a nation, with a group of people. It's Amalek. Most commentators, if you read them, like to make the analogy here of who Amalek is, right? Amalek is a descendant of Esau. The children of Israel are the descendants of Jacob. And most of them will comment on the fact and make note of the fact that it should be interesting that the first significant battle, the first significant conflict after they leave the land of Egypt is, another retelling or reliving of this Jacob versus Esau conflict that the Bible often uses to talk about the spirit and the flesh. Those are battles that are going to be fought. Those are sometimes the worst battles that we fight, or the battles with ourselves, the battles with our own flesh. So that's an interesting look at that as well. But Israel was attacked here by Amalek. When you read Deuteronomy chapter 25, you actually read that they were attacked from behind. In Deuteronomy 25 and verse 17, Deuteronomy 25 and verse 17, it says, Remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way when ye were come forth out of Egypt, how he met thee by the way and smote the hindmost of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, and that when thou wast faint and weary, and he feared not God. Therefore it shall be, when the Lord thy God hath given thee rest from all thine enemies round about in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance to possess it, that thou shalt blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, thou shalt not forget it. They ambushed them, right? The Amalekites attacked them from the back. They took those that were weak. They took those that were vulnerable. Now, ultimately, Israel is able to win this battle, and Aaron plays a very important part in that. He plays a very big role in this battle. There are great lessons from this story. I think everyone is pretty familiar with this story because of the wealth of practical lessons that you can get, right? You know, you look at this story of Moses, Aaron, and Hur on the mountain, Joshua and the people fighting on the battlefield. Everyone has their role to play, right? Everyone has their job to do. Everyone has their service to do in the service of the Lord. Helping, the people have given lessons here regarding, Moses and his weakness on the mountain. Obviously, nobody can sit there and hold their hands up all day, and yet people have found help in looking at that lesson that, Aaron and Hur, they're able to stay up his hands and helping those that are weak and helping to hold the hands of those that are weak. That imagery of intercession, right? That as Moses lifts up his hands over the people, they find victory, they find success, that role of an intercessor, that one that's going between. From here in verse number 15, Exodus 17, verse 15, it says, Moses built an altar and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi, the Lord our banner. You would look at that and it would be common for us to say, okay, what was the most important aspect of this, right? Who was the most important character in this battle? Some would say, well, it's Moses, right? Moses was the determining factor because it was his hands. When they were up, they won. When they were down, they lost. Some would say, well, it's Aaron and Hur, right? Because Moses can't keep his hands up if it's not for Aaron and Hur. So maybe they're the most important ones. None of those three are actually fighting the battle. None of those actually have a sword in their hand and are actually down in the battlefield with the Amalekites. So who gets the glory? Well, Moses makes sure here in verse number 15 that they built an altar and they called it the Lord our banner. Put the crown on the right head, right? The Lord gets the glory. Everyone did their service, and every portion of that service was needed, and yet it was all to the ultimate glory of God. God gave them this victory. Yes, Joshua did in fighting the battle. Yes, Moses did. Yes, Aaron and Hur did, but God really gave them that victory. And the Amalekites become, from verse number 16, it says, he said, because the Lord hath sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. This becomes a sour point in Israel's history. Like I said, we read Deuteronomy chapter 25, and the Lord tells them, don't forget, I didn't forget, don't forget this. And when you've gotten peace in the land, and when you've occupied the land, these people have to go in judgment. You come over to 1 Samuel 15, and Israel again wages war with the Amalekites, and what does Saul do? He starts to spare them, and he spares King Agag, and that leads to a rapid downfall of King Saul. King Saul is rebuked greatly. You and I have been able to read Exodus 17 and Deuteronomy chapter 25. We know the sour taste that Amalek leaves in the mouth of Israel. And then when King Saul spares them in 1 Samuel 15, you can see the uproar and the issue that indeed caused. All right, let's look lastly, the complaint, the conflict, and now lastly, let's look at the command of the people. Exodus 24. And there's more. There's more stories in here that Aaron's involved in. I thought these were the most significant, or at least to me. In Egypt, his commission and his contest with Pharaoh. And then here in the Exodus, the complaint of the people, conflict. And now let's look how Aaron is put in command. In Exodus chapter 24, Moses and the elders of Israel are told to come up and to worship God. In that company, we have names like Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and then there are 70 elders of the people. God is going to give Moses the tables of stone and give them a law. In Exodus 24, verse 9, it says, "Then went up Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and they saw the God of Israel. There was under his feet as it were a paved work of a sapphire stone, and as it were the body of heaven in his clearness. And upon the nobles of the children of Israel he laid not his hand. Also they saw God, and did eat and drink. And the Lord said unto Moses, Come up unto me into the mount, and be there, and I'll give thee tables of stone, and a law and commandments which I have written, that thou mayest teach them. And Moses rose up, and his minister Joshua, and Moses went up into the mount of God. And he said unto the elders, Tarry ye here for us, till we come again unto you. Behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. If any man have any matters to do, let him come unto them. Moses went up into the mount, and a cloud covered the mount, and the glory of the Lord abode upon Mount Sinai. And the cloud covered it 6 days, and the 7th day he called unto Moses out of the midst of the cloud. And the sight of the glory of the Lord was like devouring fire on the top of the mount in the eyes of the children of Israel. And Moses went into the midst of the cloud, and gat him up into the mount, and Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. God was going to give Moses these tables of stone and a law, what you're going to learn in the next chunk, because in retrospect, the writer here, Moses, keeps the story of the tabernacle all together. He keeps all of those details together. God was going to prepare a set of tables. God was going to have them prepare a place, a meeting house, the tabernacle, a place of worship. And God gives them a great sight here. Now, there was a great fear when they first came to Sinai, and they hear the thunderings, right? The rumblings, the earthquakes. And yet God in this passage allows Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and these 70 to see a great vision. God has made his presence known. God is getting ready to give Moses the covenant, the tables of stone and the law. And in doing so, Moses is going to be gone. He's going to be gone a long time, 40 days and 40 nights. He's going to have to leave some people in charge. Who does he leave? Well, it says there in verse number 14, his brother, Aaron and Hur. And listen, to this point, there's no reason not to, right? Aaron has proven himself to be a faithful helper, a valuable spokesman. He's been with Moses and stood with Moses every step of the way. If there's anybody that he could leave in charge that would know the mind of Moses and know the things that God has said to Moses, it would be Aaron. So Aaron is put in charge here. Aaron is left in command of the people as Moses goes up into the mountain. That really kind of sets the tone and sets the scene for the story that comes next. Now, there's a large parentheses, right? Because chapters 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31 all deal with the tabernacle and the things that God is giving Moses. But you read the end of chapter 24 and you read this. Aaron's been left in charge. Moses leaves, and now Moses has been gone a long time. That is the immediate background to what we'll probably talk about next week when you get into chapter 32. And Aaron kind of messes up a little bit. And this is kind of one of the things that he's known for, this mistake that he makes there. But before that, Aaron has been a good leader. He has been a valuable assistant and spokesman for Moses. You and I would have left him in charge too. This is not an indictment against Aaron, as much as we'll talk about the circumstances next time that lead up to what happens in 32. All right. Father, we're thankful to come today. We're thankful for the evidence that we have in your word of your